I'm Angelica Martin, and I'm principal of a landscape architecture design and build company. I'm based out of Palo Alto, and I originally got recruited into designing for as a designer for a landscape architecture company that was owned by actually a family friend who really saw my passion for it. It wasn't something I sort of had a trajectory towards. And I hit the ground running. I just loved it so much. It was just felt very much in my element. I really love working with land and kind of shaping it. And it just calls to me on every level. So that's sort of how I came by it. Then I had already done sort of my graduate work in another field. And I went back and started taking, at the time, Berkeley had a landscape architecture evening extension course. So I was able to do that in parts. And and I just started this company with help from consultants, and it's wonderful. It's been going really well. I've learned so much. I'm always looking to grow. I love Olesia's energy, and she just has such a unique take on, and she really understands how everything's interconnected. I look at landscape as it's fully an extension of the home. And I love that she showed that picture, because really that's what I get called out at that point. And I always try to get people to encourage people to reach out when they're still planning their home. That's really when you want to engage landscape, because it is part of it.
And that's exactly why you're here today, because I know both of us share the same pain in our everyday work life, and that's people call us too late. Yeah. And before we go deeper, sorry?
Not too late. It's just that it just would have been so much more optimal, right? We're trying to optimize.
Yeah, I mean, if people were trying to save money, we should have come in earlier. Yeah, that's one way to put it, right? And also, before we go into details about why should we start calling you before we started digging out holes for pipes, I know that you are also the contractor. Can you tell us, first of all, which kind of license you have and why you've decided to have this particular license?
I currently have a C27, although I just put in for my General B, because a lot of what I do is sort of General B work, and I'm allowed to do that in the context of C27. So for a specialty license, the C27 gives you the most freedom as long as you're working under the context of landscape. So that's typically how it works. And hopefully that answers the question. I can go on.
It certainly does, because I think some people don't realize that there are different types of licenses as well. And in the same way, that kind of brings up my next question, because also people do not understand why they need to do a survey before you can start work.
Yes. So you need a survey for multiple reasons. Well, if you're building your ADU, you obviously need a survey to understand where your property starts and ends, and if there's any easements running through, who you need to engage. And this extends to landscape as well. Who you need to engage and interact with during the process of planning and permitting. So do you need to engage with public works? Do you need to engage with planning? Or do you need to engage with building, right? So those are all questions answered by the survey and clarified. Your architect will need them. Your landscape architect will need them to understand the contours of the land and what structures to propose as well.
Do you use them for pathways as well?
Yes, I use them mainly for pathways. For scaling, you get a more accurate plan. And it's really money well spent. You shouldn't skimp on a survey because here's one thing people don't understand. I tell my clients this, when they usually will engage me sort of after they've done maybe a remodel, or a new house. So they'll have a survey. But if I catch them before, sometimes every once in a while someone will call me when they're thinking about remodeling their house, and I'll have some input on the design of the house, which is very exciting, because then I really think about how you're engaging inside the house to outside and sort of the process of the client. So when that happens, I say, get a survey from a very reputable surveyor. And the reason for that is you will save money on design. And why? could you ask? Well, these surveys are done in computer-aided drafting CAD, and they contain information and vectors. So a less costly survey will oftentimes have less data. That means the architect or designer will have to go back and retrieve that information. If you have a very simple flat pool, like a pool table, and it's not a complex project, you'll get away with it, it's fine. But if you're on a slope or any kind of complex, like any kind of situation that is, that has any level of complexity in either the design of the building or the surrounding areas, you should get a more comprehensive survey. And you should ask the surveyor what kind of survey they're doing.
So how do you correctly ask for the survey that has all the details?
Yes, you get I would get a recommendation from the architect or designer, that someone they've worked with before, and they're used to kind of getting information from them, and they've seen what kind of data they put on the surveys.
Okay, thank you. And again, before we go any deeper, could you run through the vocabulary that people use when they talk about landscape design? Because sometimes we're like the same way as I speak about ADUs, and I expect everyone to know by now that if they know me, they should know what ADU is. Like, what are the terms in your case?
Well, for me, there's a dichotomy in how terms go, because on one hand, I design, and then on the other hand, there's construction and build terms. So to address sort of the design process terms, it's very similar to, architecture in general. But really, like for landscape, it's all of the terms you use in ADU that I'm sure many of your sort of the cohorts here are familiar with. But also you would need to know terms like when people refer to hardscape, what does that mean versus softscape? Because those are different, they're very broad terms. And what it means, it's really calling out which areas are paved or structures versus areas that are softscape, which are like plantings and require oftentimes irrigation. And people understand this from the context. You need to understand it from the context of planning. So for water management, if there's any ordinances in your city, there's certain ratios you're allowed to have, and it depends on the property and sometimes on the town. And then, so that's why that's important. It's also important to understand hardscape versus softscape. And again, hardscape is like flat work, any kind of flat work, like that's usually sometimes impermeable surfaces. And because of value points, like it's a more expensive thing to do versus just putting down plants. So if you want to understand the square footage of hardscape to softscape, that's what that means.
But I think that also brings us to what is commonly addressed as MDA, like maximum development area as well in new construction. I mean, you don't usually come across it in ADU, but it's always good to know, because I know also that some cities treat different, what seems to me as a, like average homeowner, totally permeable surface. For some town, like wooden deck, is actually not. So
it's considered structural. So in Atherton right now, one of my projects in Atherton is all like any kind of shade structure is considered buildable. It counts towards buildable, but then they're not counting, a patio that we're building as buildable. So, and in other cities, like in Palo Alto, they might count part of the patio as percentage of the patio, and the shade structure. So it just depends on the city. And you can't say like one city is more strict than other. They're just different.
I have to tell you that if there is one phrase apart from ADU that we've heard every time, is "it depends." It's incredible. Everything is "it depends."
It does. It really does. And it's true. And then I was kind of frustrated by that answer. And I'm like, I'm going to give people a clear answer. And really, it just varies. And I think it's important to just own and accept that, because it helps manage your own expectations about, and frustration as well.
Yeah. And that was actually one of the passionate speeches by one of the contractors who come out actually from SFA ADUs. He was saying that accept whatever the town tells you and be patient. I think that's something that we're dealing with in these events as well. We prepare ourselves so that we can make this experience, even though it looks very hectic, still kind of happy and pleasant as far as we can. Yeah. Okay. So moving on to some specific examples. I have my own pet peeve against retaining walls. What are usually the challenges that you see when you're called into the similar construction site that I've just shown you in the picture?
So a lot of it starts with site. Well, do you mean like, just to clarify the question, do you mean like how to understand the process of when is needed? Is that your question? Or is it?
Well, yeah, I'm always looking for a story that will kind of shape the conversation so that I know that there will be a site where you come and go like, if I was here 1 month ago, I would have done it differently and it would have saved money. But now that I'm here at this particular moment, I'll have to do something more expensive. Okay,
well, I don't quite have that recently. Normally, just to preface it about retaining walls. So retaining walls, are a structure. I'm sure people won't know what this is, but they create a division between where a grade break is, so that the land doesn't, it retains.
Slide, yeah.
So currently, you need anything over 3 feet needs to be engineered. It's really 4 feet. They allow 1 foot for footing, but anything 3 feet exposed from grade requires a permit and engineering. Now, here's where it gets a little bit where it depends. If the retaining wall, if the slope above the retaining wall exceeds 26.5 degrees, then even if it's, say, 2 feet tall, you still need to have that wall engineered. So it could be lower than 3 feet, and you still need it engineered. And you can get stopped for that. And that actually has happened. So here, I'll tell you a story. So that has actually happened to me. However, I knew and I was prepared, so it was a happy ending. But I had a project in Belmont, and the clients called me and they said, okay, this was like kind of earlier in my career. And they said, we designed this, and they kind of gave me free rein. It was a really nice project because of that. And I designed this retaining wall. Well, it was like 2.5 feet tall, right? However, it did meet that requirement with the slope. But I had a soils engineer come out and tell me it was all bedrock. So basically, I wasn't retaining the wall, anything. It wasn't doing a function. It was just a seat wall for aesthetics, basically, is what I had designed. Well, the building inspector drives past, slams through the stop notice, and I'm just like mortified. And I go over there and he's like, no, you need to have it engineered, and stubbornly said I needed it engineered. And I had already I had soils reports on it. I had everything saying it's bedrock. And I realized that sometimes you'll encounter someone. It's true what you said about working with people in the city, but once in a while you will encounter someone that just digs their heels in. And that's what I had encountered. And I realized I didn't want to lock horns with him. And so I talked to the client, and luckily we had kind of done all our work, and we let the engineers handle it. We just let the engineer, that's why we hired the engineers. We let them respond because they were more qualified to make that assessment. And eventually he just kind of backed down, and I didn't have to engage in anything, with him. And so so it's kind of a lesson in, and in hindsight, I probably, now what I would do is I would go to them first and just say, here's the information. So in case you happen to drive by, this is what's going on. And I'm better at communicating those things now, but there was definitely a takeaway there. And so if anyone encounters that, that does happen, and you will once in a while get someone, not often. It's more rare than not.
Well, I had a different experience, which kind of boils down to the same thing, with a very long driveway that was with the slope, where the geo engineer actually assumed that the soil was the same on the top of the driveway as on the bottom of the driveway. Mm-hmm. And then the same thing as you were saying was happening with the bedrock.
Yeah.
And we just cherish this experience, because even the geotechnical engineer, who is very experienced, his name is on every second fence that has new construction on, he will say that that was homeowner's insight. So it was the first time he had to face this sort of situation. So just take it. That's experience.
Yeah, so likely it won't happen to many people, but just, if it does happen, it just, just stay calm and make sure that your planning process, that you kept track of everything and it's all there.
Yeah. But I think it also matters to work with people who are experienced and who have done similar projects. That's what I'm trying to drive home sometimes. And by similar, I mean actually similar in design and similar in scope as well. So that brings us, I think, to your own passion, because I know that you have a very particular selection of plants, for example, that you recommend.
Yeah, well, it's always changing.
Okay, go for it.
It just, now I'm like paranoid saying it depends. Depends. It depends on the microclimate where you're at and the soil conditions and also availability. So when you're doing plant selection, I actually go through and look at prime lists. So I work sort of inversely. It's definitely more time consuming. So if you're looking to have just, I just want to get it done quickly, this is not the approach for you. But I will look at prime lists and then sort of by POE, figure out, like process of elimination, right? Just figure out or just decide what goes with the aesthetic that we are shooting for. And of course, the default for me is always just being a California native myself, just to always go with the lowest water needs and something that's very sustainable and that just respects the land that it's from. So I always kind of try to follow, and then also it mirrors what my clients' tastes are as well, and mine, because in the end, I want to look at it and be proud of it too, and someone's going to live there and have enjoyment of that year round. So you combine all of these factors. If you're just looking for like plant lists, I suggest going to the WUCOLS website. That's WUCOLS. I'm sure you're familiar with it, Olesia, but and then that will give you like a list of plants, and you could type in the city and it will generate a list of plants for you. But again, that's a very broad thing, and it's just everyone has a different approach, but that's a good resource.
Yeah, but I think also part of the reason why we need landscape architects is that we expect them to kind of not see as it is now, because what we will get from any nursery is like this big, right? Or okay, this big. But we expect you guys to kind of
we sort of project in the future, because my house is a testing ground for I love plants. So I love, and like I said, anything related to outside, but just I'm able to come take them, test them, see how they're doing before I plant them, and then then my client doesn't have to worry about it. I know what kind of water they need. I could create a localized irrigation system specifically for that plant based on my experience, and also, just this being a specialty line of work. So it definitely is a specialty thing, and there's a huge reason why a general contractor say, oh yeah, I'll do the landscape. They just want to do the hardscape, right? They'll do that. They're very eager to just pour concrete. But I always tell people, pause a little bit before you start doing your hardscape outside. And I know general contractors, especially if they don't design, they like want to go on pouring concrete anywhere, because then it's just like a margin for them, and they may just make money. They're on site and they're like, we'll pour concrete. But many times you'll have to undo it, or it will be a bad design. So it's okay to slow down a little, and the plants take time. You have to do these, landscape gets created in layers. Yeah.
And I think that's an important part, and that will also depend whether you are inside, your backyard is completely fenced in, or if you have open space nearby and any deer can come in and take a bite out of your plant that you previously were told was deer resistant. And then it turns out that it's not deer resistant at all, because maybe deer knows that it's not, it shouldn't eat it, but its baby deer has not gone to school yet.
They can't read the no deer sign. So I think it's, it's not a big news flash for you, I'm sure, but there's no such thing as a deer-proof plant. There's just no such thing. No plant exists. If someone told you this plant is deer-proof, they're lying. It's not true. So a plant could be, case in point, like I just planted, I planted Arbutus Uneta Oktoberfest, which is a dwarf strawberry tree, and they're just quite, they're lovely. They leave like a really nice frame. And I told the client, deer will nibble on it, and don't freak out, because I couldn't get them in a big, I always shoot for getting like a big size. So I usually don't try to plant little things. It's so underwhelming. So I will like hand pick plants myself and like try to find the biggest ones I can get. But these, it couldn't be helped. They were like this big, you know, which is small for me. And so they did nibble on them. And then the client calls me like a few months later saying they stopped eating it. And I'm like, I told you they would stop. They need to root in. The plant needs to mature, and they will eventually be deer resistant. So sometimes you need to give them a little help by spraying something on them, but you know,
yeah.
There's also that.
Yeah, I've also learned a new term, because I now am looking into plants being turkey resistant.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's a thing in my neighborhood now as well.
Yeah, I have wild turkeys.
Yeah, so and it turns out that they love Mahonia.
Yeah, they do.
They just
eat it. They'll just strip it off.
Yeah. So I've never thought of that before. Okay, let's dive more into backyards. And people build cottages in the backyard for a variety of reasons, and some of them are actually for rental purposes. Mm-hmm. And then we're thinking, how can we separate the part that our renter can use and the part that a family would still like to use for their own family pleasure, so to say?
Well, I think a good landscape plan has a lot of value to offer when it comes to ADUs and principal residences, and a few reasons why. Well, one, you're creating a sense of hierarchy, right? Obviously the hierarchy is in the architecture, but then sometimes, depending on the architecture, it's not so pronounced. So landscape will enhance that. And you do this by creating, you know, positive and negative shapes. And so hardscaping creates like a positive shape, right? So that's why you want to be very thoughtful about the hardscape you put down. The other value it has, other than creating hierarchy initially, is accessibility, right? So the access, what are the access points to the ADU? How are they private from the home if that's what you're shooting for, right? So accessibility is another point in how is landscape, all of that flat work is you're creating access points, and you have to fold in aesthetic and function. So there's a whole process that is involved with that. The other way I think landscape provides a lot of value for having, when it comes to creating an ADU, is that you can create a sense of privacy, but then also not interfere with the boundaries of the land. In other words, you don't want to create a little tract inside your property, right? I mean, you still want to feel like you still have all of this land. And I've seen a lot of ADUs where they just kind of, and they landscape to kind of wall it off and make it seem like it's just another, you might as well have like subdivided your house and sold that lot, right? So,
except for clarity, it's not allowed.
And it's not right, but it's like it's its own thing. And while yes, you want it to feel like it's its own thing and has its own identity for the purposes of privacy, you don't necessarily want it to visually do that. And so that's when a good landscape plan is going to be very important. I'm working on a house right now that has an ADU that I'm very excited about. I don't have any pictures to show yet because it's not done, but it's very modern. I'm super excited about it. But I think that's what I kind of tried to achieve there, because I mean, and also I was called after. So as the not having input on the footprint and what kind of sort of lot I am left with as a, doing the landscape design, then I have to find all of these cures, right, for it. So that's another reason why you should engage the process sooner.
Yeah, and that's again why I've started with solar, because if you direct your house in the wrong kind of direction, like, excuse me for repeating myself, then you're missing out on solar energy, you're missing out on 20% of tax returns in this particular year, and you're missing forever on PG&E kind of price increases, right? Or rather, you are gaining PG&E price increases. So, and that's why we're talking about landscape today. Have you seen a lot of grey water being used for landscape purposes?
That's a good question. So yes, and yes for very limited applications. So the reason why, because I've sort of started exploring this, and I thought, okay, I should design something, right, that does this. And I realized there's a company kind of already doing that, but it's very costly to do. The reason is the timing. So when you have gray water, you can only hold it for so long. You need to hold it for less than 24 hours, and then you need to get rid of it, right? Mm-hmm. Time an irrigation system, and to use that amount of volume, right, that you're holding in a tank, so, and that is coming in from the house, you need to have an overflow for it. You also need to have something intelligent. It needs to be smart. It needs a smart controller, right? Because you need to be able to tell it, release the water from this source. It's a lot of if-thens, right? There's a lot of if-thens in this type of irrigation system. So it's hardware, it needs hardware, it needs, and it needs software. So this is why I think it's not used so much in terms of like for a typical landscape installation, but it is used for like, they have it like at Facebook, they use it, just because there's a lot of grasses. So you have a big grassy area, things that can tolerate being really wet and then, for a prolonged time and then just dry out and are very forgiving. Then it's a good sort of idea for it. Some people use them for veggie gardens. That's more popular. But it's really a matter of thinking, is the quantity, you can quantify how much water you're using, and does it make sense for our home? I think the rainwater is kind of a nice solution, catching it from the downspouts and doing that, because then you can hold the water for longer, right? But it's just immediacy of needing to use it right away. Otherwise it goes bad, and you need a special system for that.
Yeah. Well, the reason I'm asking is that the most obvious source of grey water is, especially in the backyard cottage, is the laundry machine, right? So does it make any sense to use just that, not overcomplicate the whole system, and just have it kind of drain completely into some garden bed? I don't know.
Those things so big. I'm always like the whole house, and I always want to find ways to include everything. But for now, people, that's a lot more common to just do the laundry, and you can feed it out to like a veggie garden or something like that. That's a nice clean solution, or just to an area where you have like kind of cluster plantings. So,
but you don't need the system for it. You can just drain it into the ground.
yeah, you can drain it direct. You'll need filters. So you don't need to hold the water or anything like that. You can just drain it directly.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, I love talking to you, you know that. And thank you very much for finding time, because I know this is like, what is there any season that is busy season for landscape architects?
It's so year round.
In California.
No, I think there's a different level of demand for a design builder, because as a design builder, I'm on site. So I go to my project sites like every day, you know, so I know what's happening. I know if it's lining up with the vision that we had created. And a lot of it's in the detail as well, that you can't quite, I mean, you can kind of draw it, you know, people and, but it's still like, there's always one thing with landscape that sort of differs from like home construction, is that there's always some kind of tweak, you know, and I'm there, that's true for home construction as well, but that kind of requires a little more granularity that, yeah, so I actually go out there. It's lovely.
And we have a question now. How do landscape architects deal with costs?
Oh, okay. So usually there's everybody's different for landscape. So there's usually, for me, how it works is I'll have a design process, so design phase, and there's just a flat fee for design. Most will do like an hourly fee, but because I'm a builder, my goal is to sort of create something that is enough to translate to the client what it is they're getting, like what are you getting for this, right? And to get us to the point of budget and cost, and to be able to create a line item estimate. So the more detailed plan you're going to get, the more you're going to pay for those plans, right? So again, it depends on the project and what is needed for that. But generally speaking, I don't try to create overly complex plans, because I know I'm going to have to get more granular when I start doing the construction. So it's a good value point for the client, because they're not paying for that essentially. It's really just kind of in the construction cost, because it's something I need to do anyway as a contractor. But most contractors don't know how to do that, because they don't have the training to do that, or they're not designers. So there's that. So if you just call a landscape architect or landscape designer, they'll charge you a design, either flat fee or hourly, usually hourly. And then after that, it takes you so that you know what you need for construction, and a contractor will then bid that based on the design.
You'll have to tell us the range. We cannot let you go without number.
It can range for like an ADU. It can range. It's usually like anywhere from, it could be a couple of $1,000s to $10,000, just depending on the land, you know, it just depends on the property, the size of the property, and what kind of work is being done. Yeah.
Slope or no slope, retaining wall or no retaining wall.
Yeah, just how complex, you know, I've done, yeah. So I mean, a lot of them can just be like a few $1,000s, and you have a good landscape plan. So.
And a second question is about when you're doing an ADU in the front yard. Anything to, like, any consideration to take into account?
Yeah, one, I would really think about the paths, because you don't want people going and knocking on the ADU thinking it's the principal home. So like how you're laying out, what the orientation of entrances, right? So you really need to think about how everything is oriented, how your visitors are, assuming, you know, we have visitors during this era, but how people are perceiving and interacting with that land and those structures. So I would really think about the orientation of the paths, and then also like how you're screening what, and what it is you want the face of the house to be relative to the street. Like what angle of the house do you want to show to the street? So you do that with plantings, and you can do that with landscape structures, such as seating, retaining walls, paths, you know, landscape boulders, how you're forming the land, mounds, you know, berms. So there's ways to kind of shift the orientation to the eye. You're not really shifting the house, right? But you're sort of redirecting the eye to look to a certain place. That's what landscape does.
And I think what you are saying is also part of the reason why some municipalities don't even allow to place an ADU in the front yard, because they don't want this, people to mistake this for the main house.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. But I think it's a good point that you're not actually moving anything. You're just redirecting where your eyes go. And I think Filoli actually has a good example of planting a tree so that the eye could go towards the mountains.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much. I don't see any other questions. But I'm sure I will share the link to your website if people want to see your work. And obviously, guys, you're all welcome to ask me questions if you have anything else to learn about. And as usual, I'm looking for ideas what people would like to listen to during these events. And finally, we do have the next one planned, as I've mentioned, July 9th, about treating design as investment. Thank you very much, Angelica. Always a pleasure to see you.
Yeah.
And thank you, everyone. I'll stop.